The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Straight ahead on this edition of Perspectives, it's hard to believe in the year 2014, we are 150 years after the Civil War. We'll let you know about some things that occurred during that time and some very important key pieces of history that's front and center on this edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Darren Hyman.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life. What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Darren Hyman. Of course, we invite you to stay connected to Perspectives. Now, check this out. If you want to check us out, this is what you do. BronxNet, Channel 67, of course. Now, if you say I can't do that, well, you'll always catch us on the World Wide Web, www.bronxnet.org. Verizon Fios, Channel 33. And then also, how do you check us out on social networking sites? BronxNet Perspectives on Facebook, and then also on Twitter. There you're able to share about the show, give us some insight. What do you think? What do you like? What would you like to see in a future episode? All of that's available on our social networking sites, and we want to be interactive. We want to share with you. And so make sure that you do that. Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we go front and center. It is 150 years after the Civil War, coming up on the 150th anniversary, and a lot of history. For many people, the Civil War was just that, history. But for some people, it was really important. It affected family, friends, lives. And joining us now, two persons who are going to share with us a little bit about the history of the Civil War and the impact it has locally. We're pleased to be joined by Ms. Denise Shepard, as well as Francis Carl, who is the great-grandson of David Carl. And if you want to know who David Carl is, just stay with us. We'll be letting you know in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So when you talk about history, I'll start ladies first. Denise, okay. Talk to us about the Civil War, because there was a lot that occurred in the Civil War, and particularly with African Americans.
Well, you know, when we were in school, we never were told that African Americans really served in the Civil War. Actually, there was no existence at all. But coming up from a family such as ours, you know, we're first cousins. And our grandfather always instilled in us that we did have a place in the Civil War. Our great-great-grandfather fought nobly. He was free prior to even getting into the war and enlisting voluntarily. And bringing this information to our teachers, they didn't want to hear it. They dismissed it, you know, which made me look into our history further when I became older and recognizing that we had so many others that had fought, you know, in their own regiments, 3 regiments out of the state of New York. You know, one of the 26th, the 20th, and the 31st. You know, so there's a lot of history. It's just that you have to look for it.
Yeah. Francis, when you look at the history of the Civil War, knowing that you have descendants, great-great-grandson of David Carl, and for somebody who doesn't know who David Carl is, first of all, let us know who he is.
Wow. Yes, thank you for having me. David Carl was just your average American. He was a free black man born in 1845. And then when the Civil War came about, in the beginning, blacks were not allowed to join the military. Basically, there were no regiments for them to join because they could not fight alongside white soldiers. So it wasn't until 1863 in the state of New York that colored regiments were formed in order to allow the black citizens to take part in the Civil War. David Carl was one of those persons. He enlisted in 1863. He enlisted with the 26th U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment. And basically, his story is very compelling from the time that he enlisted until the time that he actually got out when he was discharged. He was a resident of Oyster Bay, born and raised there. His enlistment was just something that is so documented that we have just recently found out as far as the records are concerned and his involvement in the regiment. A lot of the information that we did find were at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and it's just some compelling information about the individual and the service that he provided for our country.
And when you talk about that, I mean, you know, you had to go all the way to Washington to basically find out. And what is that like, first of all, having to travel to Washington to find out about your own family?
Yeah. Well, like I said, we had a little head start.
Yeah.
You know, our grandfather, he was very into history, into our family history, and we had a lot of information already at home, such as who he married, which in our town, he was one of the first to have married interracially, which was uncommon back then. He was 19 when he got married and 21 when he actually served, you know, went into the war. But going to D.C., it has so much. His pension file is like this thick, you know, and it talked about all the things that he had to encounter while he was in service. His boat detail, he was a boatman prior to even getting into the war. And while he was there, one of the details he had was going out of Rikers. That's where they had their training, right here in Rikers in the city. And along with a few other men that were from Oyster Bay as well, because as you know, it's right on the water.
Right.
You know, so they had a history of doing that sort of service and that sort of work, and they were utilizing them for that while they were in the war.
What amazes you both, I guess, when you look at the fact of, you know, first of all, African Americans playing a part in the Civil War, given the fact that you're talking about a segregated time.
Yes.
And you're talking about a time when really blacks were just struggling to really be accepted, but yet and still wanting to be a part of fighting for their country.
Yes.
What does that make you feel like?
It makes you feel good because, as we said, he was already free. But most of his friends were enslaved.
Right.
New York State was one of the highest slave states in the North. And but there were a lot of people that were still slaves while he was walking around free, you know, and he wanted everyone to feel the same sort of freedom as he felt, you know, as being just a part of the country as well as the community. So it just makes you feel good.
And there was a lot of opposition also in the beginning to colored regiments fighting in the war, particularly in New York State. The governor at the time, Horatio Seymour, was totally against African Americans participating at all in the war. And as a matter of fact, if it wasn't for the Union League Club of New York, who put a little bit of political pressure on the War Department at the time and Abraham Lincoln, the regiments would have never have been formed because the governor at the time did not return letters, did not return any correspondence in reference to the regiments being formed, because in the beginning the authorization had to go through the governor in any state of the Union for these regiments to be formed. The governor at the time, Governor Seymour, he was just basically afloat. He did not want to participate and did not want these colored regiments to even be established.
Coming up after the break, we're going to take a look at some very interesting pictures, get some history and a more in-depth analysis as we celebrate 150 years after the Civil War right here on Perspectives in a minute.
Adopting a new pet is a rewarding experience. And shelter pets make super pets. Your new best friend will steal your heart, bring you happiness, and enrich your life for years to come. You can make a difference in the life of an animal. Adopt and bring home a shelter pet today. To find out more, visit theshelterpetproject.org.
A single ember from a wildfire can travel over a mile. That ember can ignite and destroy your home or community. You can't control where that ember will land. Only what happens before it does. Visit fireadapted.org to learn how you can help protect your community from wildfires.
Mom, can we get some ice cream?
Please, Mom, please.
No, we're having dinner soon.
Please.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of children in foster care who will take you just as you are.
Brush, brushy, brush, brushy, brush, brush your teeth. Every day and every night. Brush, 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 brush. Now it's your parents' turn. Here's what you gotta do. Look and have your toothbrush and a take and brushy, brush your teeth. Good job, you're almost done. 4, 3, 2, 1, that's it. Help your teeth stay healthy. Brushy brush with a grown-up every day.
And there you saw just a few of the names that have been etched in history as African Americans who fought in the Civil War. Our guests here with us, Francis Carl and Denise Shepard. And as we started off the segment, we took a look at this banner. And so for somebody who was taking a look at the banner, just give a little bit of an explanation.
Sure. Well, Frank and I, along with a few other people in our town, had decided to uncover a lot of the Civil War veterans buried or interred in a cemetery plot like 500 feet from where David Carl lived. It's Pine Hollow Cemetery, and those are the soldiers that are buried there. And we decided to do a honored ceremony this past November for Veterans Day, and put together this program along with the reenacting group. And of course, there were others that were buried, but in a different cemetery on Long Island, in Wantua, New York. And most of them at the bottom are relatives of ours as well.
Really?
Yeah. So we have a long history of veterans in our family, you know, Frank as well as being one himself, you know, but it all goes back to and stems back to history, you know, oral histories that were told to us as children. And as a result, I was able to put it in a children's story, some of them.
Right.
Which is one of the books that I had. This is years ago.
Yeah, I wanted to look at that because you got a couple books there, and a couple of pictures, and I want to walk through that.
Yeah, well, this is just something that I had started years ago.
Face it that way. Yeah,
oh, sure.
it. Yeah,
I'm sorry. And the school districts on Long Island decided to put it into the schools, along with a program that was for several years, and I don't do that anymore.
Right.
But it was in a program that allowed the children to engage in music, history, art, and based on stories that were told from us from generation to generation. We're talking about 219 years of history that we were able to document, you know, which propelled me to write my own book, which is The Constant Struggle Within, which is a personal memoir of our family history.
Right. Give us a little bit about this, because when you look at history today, kids in school have the opportunity to read books. It talks very clearly about the Civil War, but you do not get the perspective of this in the history books.
Right.
First, the feeling. Second of all, given the fact, and now it's family related, and this is related and it's personal.
Right.
How do you carry this out? Because you got to feel a certain sense of we have to tell the story.
Right. And we have to do our due diligence in getting the information, because like Denise was saying, when we were coming up, we were taught in our history classes about the Civil War, but we were never told about the black regiments that, Abraham Lincoln basically gave credit to for helping us win the Civil War. That information was never shared. So I think it's a due diligence that the younger generations will have to seek that information. We can't allow them to not have that information at hand. The internet is a great vehicle to use for that type of research. And I would recommend young folks to, basically get online and just do a search of their parents, their grandparents. Ancestry.com is one of the great tools that they can utilize, and they will be surprised at what they will find.
I want to take a look at some of the pictures you have here. If I can take a look and see, and I'll
Sure.
show it to my viewers
Absolutely.
here. And so what am I seeing here?
Okay, this is the
Well, let me fix it up.
This is a picture of David Carl. It was actually a Civil War picture that was in his pension file at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So basically, that tintype photo, it was a standard type of picture that was taken during the Civil War of soldiers. There's not really an image that you can see on that particular picture, but what I did was, while at the National Archives, I was able to take a photo of that picture to get a better detail of the image. And then once that image was obtained, we were able to get a remake of that photo. And this is the picture of David Carl.
Let's bring that here. Let's show that right here.
So
yes, you can see the flag is draped over the chair.
What does it feel like having to go to Washington to get information on your family? I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like,
is.
you know, and then to have to struggle with the release for information.
Exactly.
it is. That's true. But it was a wonderful journey. I mean, it was almost an adventure walking into those National Archives, being amongst all of those records, and being able to, you know, focus in and know what information we were looking for, because it was there. His pension file has been there over 100 years, over 100, 110, 10 years. So it was there. So it was very fulfilling to go into that setting to get that information.
And we're seeing something else here.
That is the actual regiment, the 26th U.S. Colored Troop Regiment in formation. I believe that photo was taken in 1864. And those are all of the soldiers from the 26th U.S. Colored Troop Regiment.
And another picture's coming up my way here.
Now, as Denise had mentioned, David Carl was a Civil War soldier and was one of the first to basically be involved in an interracial marriage back in 1863. This is a photo of his son.
His name is Frank Carl.
Frank Carl.
Born in 1868.
This is another photo of one of his other. Oops, that's all right. One of his other sons.
Okay.
Herbert Carl, 1867.
So this is another one of his sons.
Yes.
And this is a photo of our grandfather, the person who was actually able to give us the information that we needed to complete this search. Because prior to my grandfather passing away in 1987, he was the last person to know what David Carl looked like. And we had no idea what he looked like. He would describe him to us, but the feeling that we felt once we saw that photo,
we were like,
it put everything into perspective for us.
Yeah.
Give us a feeling. My homegirl Cheryl Wills, in her book, that's she talks a little bit about her family history and her ancestry. But give us a little bit about what kind of feeling it gives you, knowing to have a loved one that actually served in such a very significant time in American history and world history, and to be quite impactful.
Sure. It gives you a sense, it's real, to know that, he as well as others, and we know that there are many others out there that had done the same thing, but it gives you a sense of pride, knowing that he served his country well and his family well and left behind a legacy. I mean, my husband and I are living in the house that he bought with his own money from the war. Which is over 150 years old, But we're living in that house. We're living on his property, and we can predate that back to 1795,
Does it give you a sense, like, a person that's pretty close to me is the great-great-great-grandson of Solomon Northrop and 12 Years a Slave. So, we were talking, and one of the things that he was sharing is how it really has fueled his passion for the future. Not just to being able to tell the story, but able to also live out and feel like, he can do anything.
Right.
Yes.
What does having, a relative who served in the Civil War and seeing the history that's transcended all the way down to Washington, D.C. and the National Archives, what does it do for you personally?
Personally, it instills an obligation in you, an obligation to, go further, to seek out things, to to be appreciative of where we are right now, because it's been a struggle. And I know for a fact, just by reading the depositions of David Carl, I know that it was a struggle for him. And to know that he made such a sacrifice, because he was essentially sacrificing his own freedom to go and fight in a war where, to be honest, most white people at the time couldn't care less. The governor in this state was basically didn't want the colored soldiers to fight. So it instills a sense of, even in the face of all of that adversity, those men back then, they still felt that this was their country as well. And they were going to make their contribution, regardless as to what the politics may have been, regardless as to what the prejudice may have been. They were going to make that contribution to say this is our country as well.
Kind of reminiscent of what we hear with this Tuskegee Airmen.
Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gotta take a quick break and come back with more, some final comments. We return right here on Perspectives. Stay with us. We'll be right back in a few.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
This was me. And Mom and Dad. And my big brother Alex. And Jack. This was the day that I learned that sandals get their name from sand, and that the ocean is bigger than all of us. This was the day we all got to forget that I was sick. This was my wish.
Long before I was in Hollywood, I had a grandmother by the name of Estelle Marie Taylor, positive role models to make sure that I was on the straight path. Big Brothers Big Sisters carefully screens volunteers and places them in long-term mentoring matches with kids who face adversity. With more volunteers, especially men, and more donations, every little who needs a big can have it. Start something. If it's been a while since you've been involved, start something again. Learn more at bigbrothersbigsisters.org.
If I got to go to college, oh my goodness, I like discovering new things. You get to see what works for you and what doesn't. That helps you evolve as a person. You get to make like a supernova of skill or talent or whatever it is. I've always wanted to go to college. I just feel like that's my destiny. My name is Queen, and I am your dividend.
We are back here on Perspectives. Darren Hyman getting some final thoughts and comments from both Francis Carl and Denise Shepard, and they've been our guests in studio in the show. Talk about the 150th anniversary of the Civil War and their family connection, talking about David Carl, and not just David Carl, but so many other people that are out there. Let's push this out forward. What now that it's 150 years later? What's being done to continue to remember the legacy of people and also give this kind of promotion to those who were so committed and impactful in the Civil War?
Well, we were deciding on doing something in the summer, in June, having it promoted amongst the town. The town is very receptive, the town of Oyster Bay. So they want to collaborate with us on a few endeavors. So we're in the process of doing that now.
How does that feel, getting the support of the town?
It's a blessing because, you don't know how received they would be, knowing that, they fought so hard to be accepted, but they're pretty good now.
And so for people who want to find out more information about the 150th 150th anniversary of the Civil Rights, not Civil Rights, but Civil War, how do they go about doing that?
Well, they can go online, like you said, to Ancestry.com. There's a lot of different venues that you can look online about it. Just put in Civil War history, Civil War veterans, and it'll come about.
Francis, let me ask this question. Out of all of the research and things that you did and looking back, biggest learning experience out of all of this?
The biggest learning experience that I've gained is that these men of color that sacrificed so much back then should not be taken for granted. I mean, all of the freedoms that we enjoy today is because of what they did back then. So that's one of the biggest learning experiences. And I know that, we still have, hurdles to go over. But I think that the sacrifices that were made back then, every young man should actually make it, just make it a point to just learn about what these men did back then, because I think they would have more of an appreciation going forward, whatever they're going to do, with their lives in the future. So that was a big learning experience for me, just the sacrifices that they made back then and how it has positively impacted our people today. Like I said, we still are struggling, but I do know that their sacrifices were not in vain.
Denise?
Mm-hmm. I feel the same. I think we have an obligation to our children to explain to them about our history. We can't rely on the school system to do that, although I do feel that it should be inclusive in the books. They need to be taught this in school. I think it's a big part of history that's being left out, and we must make sure to advocate for them because they can't advocate for themselves. They're gone, they're dead, so we are here to promote them in a positive way.
And usually during African American History Month, Black History Month, you see a lot of rollout in terms of our history and stuff like that. But do you feel a personal crusade not to just make it a month, but a year?
I do.
A year long endeavor?
I do. 30 days is not 28 days. It's the shortest month of the year. We have an obligation to do this every day. And maybe our children would be more or less willing to listen. To say, listen, we're not just going to take those 28 days, and take it for what it's worth. We have to do this on a continuous basis.
Francis, you get the final word.
Well, I want to thank you for having us here. A wonderful format to put this information out. And I just would encourage anyone, to sit down and have a talk with your grandparents, your parents, uncles, to find out about,
who you are.
Exactly, find out about who you are. And I think a lot of people will be surprised at the information that they uncover.
Yeah, well, certainly. And we've been just, enamored with the things that you've been able to present to us here. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with us here on Perspectives.
Thank you for having us.
All righty. Well, unfortunately, that's going to wrap up this edition of Perspectives, but certainly we're out of time, but certainly not information. You can go to our website, see the show in its full entirety if you're just catching a portion of it right now. Also, you can hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. There you'll be able to share a little bit about what you thought about today's show, because the truth of the matter is that there is history, and in order to know where you're going, you got to first know where you come from. So thank you for allowing us to be able to share a little bit about where we come from and to see where we're going. For all of us here on the Set of Perspectives, I'm Darren Jaime. Thank you for watching. Until the next time we meet, stay safe, share your perspective with somebody else. It just might make a difference in their life. Take care.